Good morning, everybody. Today I'm going to be going over OpNav instruction 5100.19 Foxtrot. Again, just one more video in this series, but today we're going to go over chapter Alpha 3. So again, OpNav instruction 5100.19F is the Navy Safety and Occ Health Program for Forces Afloat. Let's scroll down table of contents. So A3 is going to be inspections, assessments, assists, and medical surveillance. This is going to be really fun because I have never been afloat, so I really don't know what I'm talking about aside from what I'm reading. There's a lot of acronyms in this chapter that I had to Google just to find out what they meant, probably because they're referenced in like one of the first two chapters of the book. But let's get into it. So there is a bunch of references in this manual, but I'm just going to focus on the meat and potatoes of it. So let's see, the chapter is going to talk about identifying hazardous working conditions and detecting adverse health effects, which makes sense because it's in the chapter name, Inspections, Assessment, Assist, and Medical Surveillance. So we're looking at a lot of safety stuff. Let's see. So identification of hazard trends may warrant a ship-wide safety inspection, part of a safety stand-down. So makes sense, safety stuff's important. Let me back up a second and explain the acronyms that were here. So type commander. ISIC is a term that I've never seen before, mainly working at hospitals. When I looked it up, that stands for immediate superior in command. When I look that up, it means more than just like your immediate supervisor, but normally they're talking about like base commander. So like when I Googled it, I saw like a lot of descriptions or stuff like the base commander, the echelon 2 commander. So the ISIC is kind of a big deal. It's someone high up the chain. INSURV is the Board of Inspection is the Navy Board of Inspection and Survey, and NAVSAFECEN is the Naval Safety Center. When I reviewed this instruction on my paper one, I wrote all of these out several times, so I'll probably go over what they mean as I go on later in the instruction. So workplace inspections. So safety inspections must be conducted annually in all workspaces. So annual workplace inspections. It does say that you don't have to do all workspaces and equipment at one time, so it can be staggered throughout the year. So it's not February, everyone's getting inspected. So here's that Board of Inspection and Survey again, inspection. So how do those lay out? SOH just stands for Safety and Occupational Health. So the name of the instruction. So the SOH environmental protection are conducted by the INSURV during final contract trials. So they do scheduled material instructions. Let's see. So copies of all SOH related discrepancy results must be routed through the safety officer. So the safety officer is the one that maintains like the INSURV inspections. All right, self-assessment. So this assessments that the departments are doing within themselves, they got to be conducted annually. They can be a single project or they can be staggered throughout the year, similar to the other ones. The safety officer maintains the self-assessment for 2 years. They also advise the safety consult on stuff, or the safety council on what they needed and any corrective actions done. Let's see. RAC is defined a little bit later on in the chapter. Basically, it's the risk assessment code. A little bit later in the chapter, it talks more about those. So if you see what I'm talking about the RAC, it is right here. But that's in a few more pages. The AOSA, another acronym I had to Google, is the Afloat Operational Safety Assessments. So that's conducted in the Naval Safety Center in 1 to 2 days, depending on the size of a ship, and either underway or pier side, preferably underway, because they are the afloat operational safety assessment. So it's more important when you're afloat. These are done every 6 years for submarines and ships, or sooner as requested by TICOMs or anyone up that is worried about an issue. So for me, 6 years is kind of important to note because that's kind of a random time frame, because most stuff is like every 2 years, every 3 years, every 5 years, every 10 years in a lot of instructions. So every 6 years is a little bit different. So keep note of that if that's asked. How often do your AOSA survey? Every 6 years, unless requested earlier by someone up the chain. Let's see, for new ships, that first afloat operational safety assessment needs to happen within 9 months to a year after commissioning. And it's the ISIC or the TICOM that will schedule the ships for the safety center. See, and it also talks about like briefly what that afloat operational safety assessment is. It's an in-brief program material review, monitoring operational risk and management. So how are you doing your ORM and time critical risk management practices? And there's a website that has a lot more information on that in the instruction. For 2 crew submarines, the assessment should be conducted during crew turnover, so both safety programs can be assessed. Both crew safety programs can be assessed. That makes sense. So like if have everybody there when inspecting their program. So for submarines in a major maintenance period for over 6 months, conduct the assortment shortly after they completed sea trials. I don't know what submarine sea trials are, so if someone knows, please post it up. Let's see. So the AOSA increased operational radius makes sense because it's the afloat operational assessment. Let's see, it gives the CO the safety assessment. That makes sense. So there's 9 areas in the AOSA. I'm not sure if that's something that may be on the exam, but just to be thorough: electrical, propulsion, damage control, combat systems, deck, safety and occupational health programs, auxiliary weapons, and command safety programs. Submarines, it's a little bit different. Safety officer, general department, damage control, electric, mechanical, combat systems, deck, hazmat, and medical. See, I got a little bit further than my notes. Let's see. Assessment team members conduct the hazard identification walkthrough. So they're really looking for dangerous stuff because it's occupational health. Here are those RAC codes that were talked about earlier. So each assessment attribute question lists the appropriate reference. Team members mark the attributes either compliant, requires further action, non-applicable, or unable to be assessed, which makes sense. So either you're program compliant, there's stuff you have to do, you don't inspect that for whatever reason, or we weren't able to assess it for any other reason. There's also another code that it can be signed immediate danger to life and health. I like to think of that as the snap. We got to do something about that. So the IDLH, and that needs to be immediately brought to the command attention and annotated in the report as IDLH, which makes sense. If there is something that could cause imminent danger to life and health, that needs to get routed up immediately. There are also some discrepancy codes that each of those need to be marked. So repeat safety discrepancy. So was this something that we saw before? Administrative discrepancy. So like, is this paperwork stuff that's either not annotated correctly or missing? Or is it PMS, which is that preventative maintenance service? And then there's the combination code, so RAP. So repeat safety, admin, or preventative maintenance system. Let's see. So if the senior assessor finds out that like these discrepancies are either really severe or there's a lot of them, they report that directly to the commander of the Naval Safety Center. And that's something that the chain of command gets notified pretty quickly. And it does say that the Naval Safety Center looks at preserving safety versus a need to provide perspective for significant deficiency in the chain of command. So they don't immediately report it, but the commander of the Naval Safety Center is also going to take a look at the findings and find out what's going on. See, the ORM and time critical risk management consists of team monitoring, scheduling. ISIC is encouraged to attend the outbrief, which makes sense. If like the base CO has ships and there's something wrong with them, he should probably know if there are liability to the other stuff going on. Here's that afloat occupational. Let's see. Here's another timeline. TICOMs and ISICs will receive a copy of the executive summary within 30 days after they are reviewed by the commander of the Naval Safety Center. So Commander Naval Safety Center reviews them first, and then within 30 days sends the report to the TICOM or the ISIC. See, and then within 30 days of completion of the assessment, the COs must provide their ISIC a copy of the post-assessment report, and that makes sense because if my program's jacked up, I'm going to want to report that to the boss. We got a chapter on a section on industrial hygiene surveys. So a lot of this is kind of obvious stuff, but the purpose of those IH surveys have 4 goals. So number 1, to look at health risks to the Navy. Makes sense. to establish and document exposure levels for Navy personnel. So if you're dealing with like radiation and stuff, to demonstrate compliance with safety and health exposure criteria, and provide a basis for exposure medical surveillance examinations. So makes sense. And then that's to identify, evaluate, and document all potential exposures. I don't exactly see what exposure is defined as in this chapter. So if someone that's works with the has been on a ship, has worked in safety, please let me know, like, what does exposure actually mean per this chapter, because it doesn't really define it. Like, my mind automatically goes to radiation, but I guess you could also count like heat, toxic fumes. I don't know what exposure means. So to what? Let's see. So there's also the walkthrough survey. They're looking for obvious stuff. So they're looking at operations, tasks, work, that what happens in the workplace. So is this the welding area? Do they spray paint? There's a layout that's on the report. And the industrial hygiene must know how often. So like, how often do you guys paint? How often do you guys weld? How often do you guys work with chemical stuff? And the list of hazmats will also be in that report. So look at what's in here. So reproductive hazards, carcinogens, stuff like that. Let's see. And IHs must have access to a copy of that authorized use list. So the AUL of like what materials we have, which kind of makes sense. And also, what are the existing controls in the area? So industrial ventilation, PPE. A lot of controls were talked about in the chapter B videos that I did. So look for those if you're looking at like the different controls. I know like for sound, it's primarily engineering controls that they use. Let's see, exposure assessment. Let's see. Yeah, again, it doesn't specifically describe what exposure means. But there's an exposure profile. There we go. Toxic substances and harmful physical agents. So it could be anything that's toxic or harmful. So gas, oil, welding stuff, anything. And you're looking at personnel exposures, need to control exposures, and how effective that those measures are being in reducing incidents. See, and for the exposure stuff, it's the industrial hygiene who will determine the appropriate information needed, get it, and then are going to evaluate. So it doesn't actually tell you what they need to look for exposure in this chapter, but it does say that that's within the scope of the industrial hygienist, which makes sense because that's their job, their specialty. Basically says they do their thing and you give them what they need. So a baseline industrial health survey, I don't know if it's industrial health or industrial hygiene. I think it's kind of interchangeable. So it may be industrial health, it may be industrial hygiene. But the survey is the first survey commissioned on that newly commissioned ship or submarine. Let's see. And they must contact the Navy Environmental Preventive Medicine units to arrange the survey. Must be done as soon as possible after acceptance trials and before the commencement of post-shakedown availability. Post-shakedown availability is PSA. I'd kind of assume that was public service announcement the first time I read it. So PSA is post-shakedown availability. And ships must be in receipt of the completed survey report no later than 6 months after that post-shakedown availability. The periodic IH survey is the update, so it happens every 3 years. So think the baseline IH survey as soon as possible, but no later than 6 months after that post-shakedown availability. But it does need to happen every 3 years. Will be complete every 3 years, and it updates exposure assessments and stuff like that. So before it's due, the ship needs to coordinate with BUMED 6 months before. However, the TICOM IHO may extend that survey due to circumstances. So like if there's a big deployment yard period, or if there's readiness stuff, that takes priority because number one's the mission. So it's not a hard and fast 3 years. The TICOM IHO can make that call. Let's see. So commanding or COs can also request IH assistance from that Naval Prev Med Center MTF, especially if there's like any major ship alterations. And the safety officer must make sure that IH report is pretty much available to everybody. So departments, divisions, and work centers. The individual shop sections contain required safety information that is used for that area. So like if I work in engineering, I'm going to have all the engineering parts like least of that report because it's what's most pertinent to my job. Medical surveillance, so Corpsman, that's what we're really looking for. So looking at health of people that have been exposed to stuff. Let's look. So personnel that are based on that surveillance. So the surveillance just means we're taking an extra look at these guys. They may be exposed, there may be stuff going on, but let's make sure they're doing okay or as okay as possible. So we're keeping an eye to see if anything comes up. So it may be a history of past exposure to hazmat, so asbestos, cadmium, certification, recertification. Let's see. Yeah. So medical exams. That's always important because we're Navy folk. Include baseline, periodic, termination, certification, and follow-up exams. Let's see. There's a website that has some information how you can do that. Here's a form. This is the only form in this chapter. This one's a little bit different than some of the other ones because normally if it's an Opnav instruction, the form will be an Opnav. So notice for this one, it's SECNAV 5100/1. So it's the Afloat Occupational Health, which is the 5100 series instruction. Same form number, so 5100/1, and it doesn't say it directly in this instruction, but I looked it up and let me read the name off to you. I got a little bit farther in my going off thing. So the SECNAV 5100/1 is the Department of the Navy Supervisor's Medical Surveillance and Certification Referral. So again, that's SECNAV 5100/1 DON, Supervisor's Medical Surveillance and Certification Referral. So that's basically the paperwork that the supervisor puts in to say, hey, check this guy out. See, and that should be communicated via encrypted email. Makes sense because it probably has like their medical information on it. Form's not included in this instruction, so I'm not sure what it actually looks like. Yay, junk mail pop up. Let's see. So the safety officer is going to identify trends related to exposure. So the MDR and the safety officer, from what I've read from almost all this instruction, work really closely with each other for this kind of stuff, which makes sense. Safety is number one. Medical is also part of that. The medical department representative must notify the individual's work center supervisor, DIVO, and safety officers with the results of the medical surveillance and exam. So there is also compliance that they look at, which is completed over, I mean, it's kind of an obvious rate. So what is completed divided by the total percentage. And that tells you like how compliant people are with completing those surveillance exams. Personal records. Let's see. So industrial hygiene forwards the individual exposure monitoring to the medical department for review and placement in the individual medical record. So the IH completes it, medical department files it. Let's see, the medical department also informs each individual of the significance of all findings. So kind of like anything else in medical, like, you know, part of your informed consent, and like, hey man, your leg's jacked up. This is what that means for you. This is what you got to do about it. Let's see, and then submarines exceeding the general area continuous exposure limit must be recorded in effective crew members' medical records. What goes in there is kind of obvious: time, date, contaminants, concentration, duration of time, and any other pertinent information. So kind of like the basic, how long, what was it? And federal and state inspections. So this is, again, kind of implied by the name. So it's not just the Navy that inspects this. It is also like federal, which is OSHA, and also state agencies can also try to look at ships. This section is going to have a little bit more info about that. So Navy afloat activities are advised that permission is granted by OSHA. Let's see. So it does say that state OSHA or state occupational safety and health officials must not be granted access aboard naval ships and service craft or in areas or exclusive federal jurisdiction, which makes sense. So like we're a federal organization, the military is. So state, keep out of it. We don't report to you, we report to the feds. Let's see. So except for limitations that are going to be below, in general, OSHA people pretty much give them access to what they need. To Navy civilian or contractor workplaces where Navy repair activity or contractor equipment. So what OSHA is looking for is anything that honestly affects civilians. So it specifies in here civilian or contractor workplaces. So if there's no civilians or contractors, they don't go in. They are looking at civilians. Again, kind of dark to think about it. Civilians are people. Military people aren't really considered people in the eyes of a lot of this stuff because we have our chain of command. So they're only looking for civilians. Let's see. And if they're looking for anything that requires handling and storage of ammo or explosives, say nope. Those requests go up to the CNO. Let's see. And a lot of like the requests for the access for what I think is pretty obvious stuff. So like nuclear stuff, really like national security, top secret squirrel type stuff. The federal guys and the state guys don't need to know about it because it's like national security type stuff. And that's something that needs to go pretty high up the chain of command. So all it says in here, CNO is the one that approves that kind of stuff. OSHA officials can't take any photos. Any photos that they want needs to be taken by Navy personnel and classified as confidential. And all that needs to be reviewed by the commander, Navy Sea System Command, Maintenance Industrial person. So basically it gets sent up high to the ComNav CSysCom. So the boss, they need to scrub it and make sure that there's nothing that's going to get pulled up. It does say that this process normally will be completed within a period of 15 days. However, to me, that's not very binding at all per the instruction. It just says normally happens within 15 days, but it doesn't say it has to be done in 15 days. It just says that's normally when the process will be completed. OSHA officials aren't given any copies of federal records or reports. If they want that, that's got to go up the chain. They need to have proper security clearance into areas if they need it. So representative of the CO or commanding officer of the Navy and the commanding officer of the Navy repair facility must accompany the OSHA official, which makes sense. You're not just going to send this dude a clipboard into your ship and say, hey, don't go into any areas you shouldn't be. So the CO or the base commander is going to send somebody with them. So OSHA are authorized to question privately contractor employee, Navy civilian employee, and their authorized representatives. Let's see. So unless requested by the OSHA official, contractors will not be provided advance notice of the OSHA inspections in case there's like imminent danger. Anyone that violates that can get 6 months in prison or a $1,000 fine. See, CNO gets anything from an OSHA inspection. Here's a cool little chart that describes like what federal and state. I find it kind of funny that state is even on here because it's a no for anything. So again, federal OSHA occupational safety and health reps can go into contractor workplaces. They can go to civilian workplaces. They cannot go to military workplaces because that falls under the military side of the house. There are a couple notes in here. So for these two, you see note 1, only when they're in port. So the Navy Department doesn't transfer the federal people to ships or service craft that are underway. And federal and state have no jurisdiction under unique military operations. And inspections may be announced or unannounced, so they don't have to tell you they're coming. And that's it for Chapter 3. Again, I had never been on ship, nor have I ever actually worked in safety. This is what I'm reading and interpreting. So if you have any other information that you think could be important, let me know. Again, this is OpNav Instruction 5100.19 Foxtrot, which is the Afloat Navy Occupational Health Instruction, and Chapter 3, which is all about inspections, assessment, assist, and medical surveillance. Thanks for watching.